Everyone, today's video I'm going to talk to you about air travel. And what prompted me to do this video was my son's most recent experience flying to Europe and back again. And I wanted to talk to you about some of the pitfalls of booking certain flights and also some tips to help you best maximize your money when you fly. So first of all, I want to tell you about his two J-term study abroad trips and how we booked his air travel. Okay, both of these trips that he took for his January study abroads were traveling J-term classes. So they started in one location and then the group moved to different cities and flew back from a completely different place. So last year in January of 2018, he did a class on American diplomacy. And they went to more places than this, but the main places were Casablanca, Morocco, and then a couple other cities in Morocco. And then they went to Brussels, Belgium, and then, and then they ended in Paris. Now, he didn't end in Paris. He ended in Dublin, because he went to Dublin after his time in Paris on his own. But the class ended in Paris. So most of the students flew back from Paris, but Andrew then went on to Dublin. Okay. For this particular class, for that one, I booked his air travel for him and paid for it. I got him a nonstop flight on Delta from Minneapolis to Paris. And then he had a connection, which I think was on Air France, which is a partner of Delta, from Paris to Casablanca. And then from there they traveled by bus a couple places, and then they actually flew, which that flight was booked by the school program. They flew from Tangier, Morocco to Brussels. And I know he told me at the time what that was, what the airline was, but I don't remember anymore. And it was just a direct from Tangier to Brussels without any stops. And then they took the train from Brussels to Paris. And then he was in Paris for a while. And then I actually had booked him a very inexpensive flight on Aer Lingus, which is an Irish airline, from Paris to Dublin. And then from Dublin, he flew back on Delta again, I'm pretty sure. Direct, no, I think he did have to change planes in New York, maybe? It might have been Dublin, JFK, Minneapolis, I think. I'm not positive about that one. So that's how he did it last year. Okay, this year, this J-term that he just did in Italy, I did not get to book the flights. The flights were included in their course cost, and they the university or whatever booked the flights as part of the program, and it was all in their cost, which goes on their bill for school. I did not like these flights they booked at all. I'm going to assume that they booked the flights they did to save money. I'm going to assume they were less expensive. However, in my opinion, time is money. And there are advantages to having less time traveling, okay? Which you will see. Okay, first I'm going to tell you what it was supposed to be. All right, they left on January 5th from Minneapolis. The students in the group, most of them were from schools in the Twin Cities in Minnesota. I think there was one person from South Dakota. There was somebody who was from like Milwaukee or Green Bay or something. And then there was one student from Chicago. But I think they all met in Minneapolis and flew together. They flew on United, which we've all heard the customer service stories of United. He didn't have any issues with United on this particular trip, but it's not my first choice. They flew on United from Minneapolis to Newark, and then they changed planes and they flew from Newark to Munich on Lufthansa. Lufthansa is a German airline. They are a partner airline with United, so that makes sense. Then they were supposed to fly on another Lufthansa flight from Munich to Palermo in Sicily. Okay, now I recognize that Palermo is not a common place to fly to. There's not going to be a lot of options in how to get from Minneapolis to Palermo. Okay, so they had fairly limited options there. I recognize that, okay? But it bothered me because I know that there are nonstop flights from Minneapolis to Rome, I think, every day. Now, they probably cost more, but that would have saved a lot of time, okay? I'm going to come back to that. The return flight was similarly 3 legs. It was, by the time they ended, on the class, they went to Palermo, they went to 2 other places in Sicily, they crossed by ferry, and they went to Naples and Pompeii, and then they went to Rome, and they ended in Rome, and they came back from Rome. Again, there are nonstop flights between Rome and Minneapolis every day. But they didn't do that. They took Lufthansa back to Munich from Rome, and then another Lufthansa flight from Rome, or from Munich to Chicago, and then another United flight from Chicago back to Minneapolis, okay? I'm going to tell you right now that unless I'm going to like the remotest place on the planet that you have to take that many flights, I'm never going to book 3 flights to get to one place, okay? To me, that is not worth the money. Here's why. Okay, 2 things I want to tell you. First of all, the more connections you have, the more possibility there is of something going wrong. Delays, missing a flight, weather, all sorts of things. Every time you've got to stop and change planes, you have the potential for something to go wrong, which in this case, it definitely did. Okay? The other thing is, do not confuse a direct flight with a non-stop flight. Those are not the same thing, okay? A non-stop flight means you get on the plane here, and then the plane flies, and it does not stop until you get to here, to where you're going. And it's non-stop, okay? You want those. Non-stop flights are good. They save you time, okay, and hassle. A direct flight is not the same thing. A direct flight simply means that the flight number does not change. That doesn't mean that it's not going to stop and make connections. For example, that last leg of the return flight home that he took from Chicago to Minneapolis was the second half of a direct flight on United, I think it was flight 238, if I remember right. Its point of origin was Reagan National in Washington, D.C. Okay? That's important. You're going to find out. So it stopped in Chicago. People got on, people got off, and then the flight under the same flight number continued on to Minneapolis. So it's very possible that there were people who booked a flight from Washington, D.C. to Minneapolis and might have even thought, oh, I'm just going to Minneapolis, not realizing that it's going to stop in Chicago. Okay? It's possible you might even have to change planes on a direct flight. Maybe. Okay? You might at least have to get off and get back on. All right. Here's what happened. January 5th was in the middle of our wonderful, longest ever government shutdown. I will keep my political views to myself. Okay. At that point, I think the government had already been shut down for at least 2 weeks. They were already starting to see issues at the airports. Okay. TSA agents were working without pay. Air traffic controllers were working without pay. People were starting to call in sick because they could not afford to go to work. I heard stories of, they couldn't pay for childcare, so they couldn't go to work. Or later, right before the day before the shutdown ended, I saw a clip on the news from the head of the flight attendants union, and she talked about how she was really putting forth the message that the shutdown was actually harming security of Americans because of the issues with the air travel. But she made the point that some TSA agents were sleeping in their cars at airports because they didn't have enough money to drive home to sleep between their shifts. But they are considered an essential function and they had to go to work. And, you know, they take their job seriously and they felt obligated to be there to protect the security of the airports and the people who were flying. So that's a problem. And I really think that that whole thing with the air travel is probably one of the things that pushed President Trump to finally do what he did, and at least temporarily. When I'm filming this, we're in that 3-week window between when he reopened the government and February 15th. So we'll see what happens. I don't think I'm actually going to be posting this video until after that. So we'll see if it shuts down again. But anyway, my son, I raised him well. He's a gentleman. His father's in the military. He thanked the TSA agents as he went through security at the Minneapolis airport when he left for Italy for working without pay. He knew that they were there and they were working and they weren't getting paid. And he said thank you to them. Apparently a lot of people did that, you know, the whole time, which I think is good. It caused problems. And I'm not sure if it was TSA or if it was, he didn't have any trouble really getting through security, he said, going. But I think that the air traffic control thing might have also been a factor. They were delayed leaving Minneapolis by about 2 hours, I think. Okay. They got to Newark, okay. They still were going to make their connection in Newark. But that's where they ran into trouble. Newark was a mess. The whole East Coast was a mess. I think Newark or LaGuardia was one of the ones that actually had to shut down right before they reopened the government. They're, you know, just not too long ago, last week or whatever. I'm filming this on February 1st. And they sat in Newark for a very long time. I don't know. It was 3, 4. They were quite considerably delayed by hours. Because of that, they missed their connecting flight in Munich. So I actually, in that time, had gone to bed. And when I woke up in the morning, I could see on FlightAware, which I'm going to put a screenshot here for you to see. FlightAware is a site that I recommend. It's also an app where you can track flights by flight number. You can see in real time their movement. It'll tell you airspeed, elevation, time since departure. It tells you when it's taxiing and it's already landed. It tells you what gate it's going to be at. It's really a cool site. It's very nice for tracking flights. And you can also even search if you know the route and the like general times and you don't know the flight number, you can figure it out. Anyway, so I saw that their flight from Munich to Palermo had left and they weren't there yet. They missed it. Because of this, and this is a group of 24 people, and I was a little concerned, are they going to end up getting split up? So in the morning when I woke up and I saw that they had missed their flight in Munich, I texted him and I asked him what was happening. And they were still in Munich. They were in Munich for at least 6 hours. They rebooked them on 2 more flights. So it went from 3 flights to 4 flights. So they ended up taking Alitalia, which is an Italian airline, from Munich to Rome. And then they had to change planes and take another Alitalia flight from Rome to Palermo. They ended up getting to Palermo at about midnight Italy time. They were supposed to get there at 1:30 in the afternoon. So in total, he was traveling about 31 or 32 hours. Okay? To me, that's ridiculous. All right? He could have gone to dang Australia in that time. I mean, nobody should spend that much time flying in one shot. That's just nuts. So this is where I say you really need to minimize your connections. It's not worth that money to me to lose all that time. They ended up missing their welcome dinner, which was one of the few dinners that was included in the price of their class. They had to pay for most of their meals. They got breakfast in their hotel every day, but they had to pay for lunch and dinner almost every day. They had a few meals that were included, and that was one of them, and they missed it. To some degree, it was nice because when they got there, then they were so dang exhausted, and they just got to go to bed. They got to their hotel, and they just went to bed because it was midnight. But, that's a very, very long amount of time. And these are young, healthy college students, but that's exhausting for anybody. So I'm going to put right here a screenshot of Kayak. Kayak is one of the travel comparison sites that I would recommend. Like Expedia or Trivago or, any of those. I really like Kayak. Kayak gives you a prediction thing up in the upper left-hand corner. It'll show you whether it suggests you buy or now or wait based on predictive patterns of whether cost of flights go up and down. I want you to notice here on the Kayak page, there's 3 ways you can search. Well, there's lots of ways you can search. You can change by departure time. Do you want to leave in the morning, the afternoon, the evening? You can search by airline. You can search by what category of fare you want. There's all sorts of ways you can tweak it. But one of the things I like right across the top there, you can see that you can search by best, which is like the overall best flight. You can search by cheapest, so least expensive, okay? And you can also search by fastest or quickest. I think a lot of people disregard that column. And on any airline website, that's going to be there. It's going to show you your total travel time, including any layovers with stops, okay? I always look at that because, for one thing, if you are traveling with kids, like I am, you don't want, and especially if they're littler, you don't want to be spending 18, 20 hours traveling. Because if you got to sleep and you got to eat, and if kids have naps, that can really screw you up. If you think, oh, we got this great fare, we're only paying $180 for this flight, but then your travel time is 18 hours and you're only going to Florida. Well, that's crazy. So you really want to pay attention, not just to the price, but what is your total travel time? And remember that each time you have a connection, it's going to increase your total travel time. So I like to keep that travel time. Flying to Europe, the most I would want to see that travel time is maybe 10, 11 hours. 12 max for like Eastern Europe. There's no reason it should be any longer than that. It doesn't take that long to get there. If you're spending 18, 20, 24 hours to fly to Europe, that's taking too long. So that's a tip to you. And I guess along with this, I would say, if you are traveling with young children, I very highly recommend always flying nonstop flights. It is worth a little bit of extra money to not have to deal with their ears on takeoff and landing, especially like babies and stuff, because every time you ascend and descend, it's going to bother their ears. It bothers mine. And so that's uncomfortable for them. They're going to cry. And then you really don't want to be spending time in airports. Airports are not a pleasant place for anybody to have to sit and wait. And especially for little kids when they really can't run around or anything. A few airports might have a play area or something, but Germ Central, hello. So you want to minimize the time you spend in airports. For me, beyond getting there, parking if I need to, getting through security, and the minimum amount of time necessary while still allowing for enough time to get through security that we have to sit at the gate, the better. I want to get in and get out. I don't want to be sitting in airports for hours on end. So the fewer connections, if any, that you have, the better. The smaller your children, is my opinion. Obviously, the older they get, the more adaptable they're going to be, and the easier it's going to be for them to keep themselves occupied. But, they can read a book or play on their phone or whatever. Okay, and then going back to Andrew's return flight. Okay, so I wasn't too concerned with the whole situation in Europe because the problem with the TSA and everything was here. Okay, he came back this past Monday, the 28th of January. The government shutdown had ended. It had just ended. So that was, that was done. And actually, government stuff was just reopening that day. But that was when the polar vortex preceded by the blizzard had hit. we had an unprecedented 4 snow days, cold days, off school this week in a row. That has never happened in the memory of anyone in our school district. Monday was canceled because we had a winter storm warning, and got snow. It was very light. It was very cold, and so it was light, fluffy snow. It wasn't actually that much snow. I mean, we got anywhere from, I don't know, depending on where you were in Wisconsin and Minnesota, 4 to 9 inches, which isn't a lot for us actually. But it was blowing and drifting and stuff across the roads and stuff, and I think they were concerned about visibility. In my opinion, we probably didn't need to have a snow day that day, but I only live 2 blocks from school, so where I work and where my kids go to school. So, I mean, it's easy for me to say that. It's a different story for people that live out in the country on farms and kids got to take buses and stuff. The next 3 days, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, all the schools around here were closed. The governor of Wisconsin and Minnesota actually declared a state of emergency. You might have seen on the news, it was so cold in Chicago, they actually had to light the train tracks on fire to keep them warm so that the rails didn't split and pop the bolts and stuff. It's been very, very, very cold. Coldest it's been in like 20 years or something. I think we looked it up, and the last time it was as cold as it was this week was the year that Andrew was born, 1996. Was the last time it hit like 50 below or whatever it was. So he was flying home in the midst of all that. That snowstorm went across Chicago as he was flying to Chicago. His flight from Rome to Munich was delayed just a little bit, like a half an hour. And his flight from Munich to Chicago was delayed a little bit, but they made up the time in the air. And I could actually see that on the FlightAware. So that it, for a while it said so many minutes behind schedule, but then it actually changed and said on time. They circled Chicago for some time. And then up in the right-hand corner of the FlightAware screen on my computer, there was a little box there all day about severe delays in Chicago. On the FlightAware app that you can get on your phone, for example, there's something called the misery map. The misery map will show you like a pie chart, like a little circle of which airports in the United States are having the most cancellations and delays. And on that Monday, the 28th of January, Chicago was the biggest circle on there. Lots of flights were being canceled. And all day that little text box on the right said that incoming flights to Chicago were being held at their point of origin because of snow and ice in Chicago. Now, Chicago's a tough airport. Chicago, Minneapolis usually don't, bat an eye at weather, but apparently it was just so cold they were really having trouble, I think, de-icing the planes and things like that. So they had gotten ahead of it coming from Munich and were able to land. But then that direct flight, not nonstop, United 238, I think it was, which was coming from Washington, D.C. to Chicago to Minneapolis, it was still sitting in Washington, D.C. when they were supposed to have already taken off from Chicago to come to Minneapolis. So I knew he was going to be sitting in Chicago for 5-6 hours, it looked like. And it was he'd already been traveling since, that morning. They had to leave their hotel like by 9 in the morning, Italy time, which was like 2 in the morning for us. Yeah, 7 hours difference. And he was supposed to get to Minneapolis at 11 p.m. So that already would have been 21 hours of travel just if the flights had gone the way they were supposed to. But now with the delay out of Chicago, and he did not sleep. I asked him. He did not sleep on the flight from Munich to Chicago at all. So he had been awake for 21 hours without a wink of sleep. And thankfully, half an hour or so after they were supposed to have left for Minneapolis, that plane where they were supposed to be on was still sitting at Reagan National in Washington, D.C. United pulled a plane out of the hangar in Chicago to fly them to Minneapolis. And they got to Minneapolis about an hour later than they were supposed to. They got there about midnight. We live about 2 hours from the Minneapolis airport, and well, I was supposed to teach in the morning, but we didn't have school. So, it never had been my intention to go pick him up because I was going to have to work at 7:30 in the morning. But he ended up taking an Uber from the airport back to campus and slept in his dorm that night because he just wanted to go to bed. My mom, who lives in the Twin Cities, brought him home on Tuesday, and because all his stuff was here from before he left. He'd left his oh no, he had his backpack with him, but I mean, he'd left a lot of stuff here, and he planned on spending this week at home with us, which actually turned out kind of nice because we were all home all week because we had no school, so we all got to we didn't leave the house. I didn't leave the house between Saturday and Thursday. I never left the house at all. It was so cold. We didn't want to go outside at all. I didn't even want to. We didn't have to go out and get the mail because even the mail was canceled because it was so cold. I've never seen that happen. So anyway, jet lag. Let's talk about jet lag for a minute. I'll give you a couple examples. Normally, your jet lag is always going to be worse going east, okay? Because you're crossing the time zones faster than time is passing, okay? For example, a nonstop flight from Minneapolis to London, which I've done 2-3 times. You leave at like, say, 7 p.m. in Minneapolis. You get to London at, say, 7 a.m., okay? London time. It wasn't 12 hours. The flight was maybe 7, okay? Because it doesn't actually take that long to cross the ocean, but because you crossed all the time zones, it's like 12 hours of time, but your flight was only like 7 hours. Well, you get on the plane, you get settled, they do the instructions, the safety stuff, they give you dinner or a snack or whatever, you watch one movie, then maybe you go to sleep, and then they wake you up and say, oh, here's your breakfast, and here's your hot towel to freshen yourself up. Everybody get up and do some stretches so you don't get blood clots, and oh, we're landing. And so you really only maybe slept 4 hours, or whatever. So when you go to Europe, and this would be true anywhere, wherever you're starting, say you're in Europe and you're flying to Asia or whatever, or you're in Asia and you're flying to the United States, although that's a little different because you cross the international date line, but anytime you're going east, you're going to be so dang tired that first day because you didn't get any sleep that night, but or very little. But the trick is, my suggestions for jet lag going that way are, you really need to get on the time zone of the place you're at right away. Force yourself to stay awake. At most, take a quick nap as early as possible, like as early in the afternoon, as soon as you can get into your hotel room, and don't sleep for more than like an hour or so. Because if you let yourself do what your body wants to do, it wants to sleep all night, and you'll sleep and then you'll wake up at like 2 in the morning and now you're all messed up. So if you can force yourself to stay awake, go to bed at 6 p.m. That's fine. And sleep 12 hours. That's fine. But don't go to sleep in the daytime and keep sleeping because then you'll get all messed up. So you really want to force yourself to stay awake. And then it really shouldn't take you more than a day or so to feel okay and feel, once you start eating meals at the time of the place you're at, you'll get adjusted fairly quickly. But I've always found it harder to go east, okay? Because that first day of jet lag can be really rough. Coming back is usually not a problem. Because you're traveling all in your normal daytime hours. So, for example, if Andrew had left Rome at 11 in the morning like he did, and taken a nonstop flight to Minneapolis, he would have gotten back at, I don't know, say it's an 8-hour flight, would have been like 7 p.m. Rome time, which would have been like noon here. So it's all daytime. It's not a time that your body's expecting you to be sleeping. So when you get back, once it gets into the evening, you start to get a little tired, but then you just go to bed early and you're fine and you can get right back on schedule. Which is kind of what Andrew did this this time coming back. When he got here on Tuesday, well, like I said, he got in at midnight. He went right to bed. He was up, you know, at a decent hour. He was up by 9 in the morning, and he got here about like 1 in the afternoon. But by 6 o'clock that night, like right around dinner time, he was laying on the couch downstairs, and he looked like he was going to fall asleep. And I said, why don't you just go to bed? And he's like, no, I'm going to stay up with you guys. And so he forced himself to stay up until we all went to bed at like 9. And that was fine. But the next day, boy, did it hit him hard. The next day, he was in pain because he was so tired. And we both commented on, usually when you come back from Europe, it's not a problem. We know that the reason he had so much trouble is because that day of travel was so dang long. He ended up spending 12, 18, gosh, like 24 hours traveling to get home with no sleep at all. So, I mean, anybody, you stay awake for 24 hours, you're going to be hurting. So this is, again, why I say it's really best to book as few connections as possible and to pay attention to that total travel time. Because now that's what it's supposed to be. If you have things go wrong, flight delays, in this case it was personnel issues going over, weather, whatever, equipment problems with the plane, whatever it is, that time, if it's already long, is going to get stretched out even longer, and it's going to make for a very long day or more of travel. And especially if you're going on vacation, you do not want to be starting or ending your vacation with a lengthy, exhausting, negative travel experience. So I just really always try to book nonstop flights if I can, and at the very most, keep it to only one connection, and with a decent sized layover, you know. I mean, in some instances, you might want a longer layover. Like, one example I would think of is flying to Hawaii. You might want a little bit longer layover when you're, like, say, on the West Coast, because it helps you adjust to the time zone change flying that far. But in normal circumstances, you know, especially if you're flying domestically, I really don't think you ever want a layover of more than like 90 minutes to 2 hours. That should give you enough buffer to get from one flight to the other, go to the bathroom, maybe quick grab something to eat. You know, you don't want to be sitting in the airport for hours on end. I just think that's a waste of your travel time. So that is my opinions and advice about air travel and booking flights. And I hope that this was helpful to you. And I thank you guys for joining me. If you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel and click the little notification bell so you get an email notifying you of each one of my upcoming videos. Thanks, guys, and safe travels.
We can make a wildfire get away.